Let's talk about what happened when Representative Marcy Kaptur took on Pete Hegseth.
Thanks, gentlemen. Ms. Kaptur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We welcome our guests. I come from a family of combat veterans going back a long time. And my comment is the use of certain words and what they imply. When I hear warrior ethos, and I hear it a lot from you, Mr. Secretary, I'm concerned. All the soldiers in our family, all of whom fought and received medals for their combat service, call themselves soldiers. Marines are trained to kill. In terms of domestic policing, our police and our National Guard at the state level, carefully used, but also our state police are used in civil enforcement, and they are good. I don't need any reply. I just am concerned about what those words you often utter actually do in people's minds and change the language we have used since the founding of this republic. So that is a concern of mine. I wanted to go to the General and Chairman, if I could. We've heard a lot this morning about Defense Industrial Base. And this is something I ran for office on a long time ago. We have not made significant progress as a country in this regard. And the places that made things, whether they were machine tools, whether it was composite materials, were left behind. It's one of the reasons for the division in our society. So I am very interested in knowing what specifically and in which accounts, and I hope you can get this back to us within a week and a half, you are going to focus on in order to inject additional resources in the defense industrial base of this country. What will that look like? We are just successful now in helping steel to revive and some of our composite metals. 40 years ago, I wrote a title to the defense bill dealing with strategic metals. Nobody at Department of Defense cared, okay? So I'm interested in which accounts, if you could kindly get back to me on that, and when you say defense industrial base, budget-wise, in which accounts, what does that mean? All right, I don't expect you to answer it now. Can you tell me when you might get that information back to us?
Well, ma'am, you just said a week and a half, so I know the awesome humans behind me are scribbling madly to come back to that. Can I just make a quick comment? You know, I happen to be a lucky guy that served in the private sector for a while, and I ran a machine shop in Texas along with a metal finishing business. So when we talk about defense industrial base, I broaden that out to really the national industrial base. There are certain components that are made in the defense side, but as you articulate, ma'am, many others are made in the small machine shops out around this entire nation. When I talk about mobilizing our nation, I think of that national, not just defense industrial base. What do we have to do to create greater capacity all the way down the chain to include jobs at the local level for those people that build quality parts and deliver on time with shorter lead time and lower cost? And so I have great empathy for what you're talking about, and we'll get back to you just as soon as we can.
Yes, and General and Secretary, going back to the drone attack in Ukraine, a country that was invaded by the Russian dictatorship, starting in 2014. They've been at war for a decade, more than a decade. What they've done with drones is astounding. It's going to change warfare. One of my questions is, what are you doing to establish relations with Ukraine and not turn your back on them as an administration and help them win, help liberty win? This has implications way beyond the boundaries of Ukraine. Russia's got 11 time zones. I mean, this is the most important test of liberty for our NATO alliance in my lifetime, and we better help win. And that involves moving forward faster on drone technology. I'm very worried about our air bases where we have secure assets. Mr. Secretary, can we defend them today if they were to have a similar attack?
We're certainly very focused on that, ma'am. And we're learning every day from Ukraine. I think we would need to clarify what win means. This president is committed to peace. He's committed to stopping the killing And he was not in office when it started in 2014. There were no additional incursions in his first term. And then under the previous administration, Vladimir Putin sought to take Ukraine. We're committed. This administration's committed to peace, to stopping the killing, and we think that serves
Did you just
American
leave
interests.
Ukraine, Mr. Secretary? Did you just leave Ukraine?
Young lady's time's expired, but if you can get
I did
back
not leave
to
Ukraine.
us on that.
No,
that
Have
would
you
be great.
visited Ukraine?
No, ma'am.
My first trip there, sir, was 1973. I yield
Time
back.
has expired. Mr. Carter, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
When Marcy Kaptur opened her remarks, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. She didn't try to own anyone for a viral clip. Instead, she did something far more unsettling for the tough talk crowd. She questioned the words being used by the people in charge of war. And that matters. Because language is never neutral, especially when it comes from the Secretary of Defense. Kaptur comes from a family of combat veterans, not weekend warriors, not cable news warriors. Actual soldiers who fought, bled, and in some cases died wearing the uniform of this country. And what struck her wasn't some abstract policy disagreement, it was the repeated use of the phrase, warrior ethos. Now, to some people, that sounds harmless, even inspirational. But Kaptur stops us and says, wait a minute. The people in my family who fought in wars didn't call themselves warriors. They called themselves soldiers, Marines, service members. People who understood that violence was a last resort, not an identity. That distinction matters more than most politicians want to admit. Because when you romanticize war, when you turn service into a brand and combat into a vibe, you change how people think about force, policing, and power. You blur the lines between military missions abroad and civil enforcement at home. And history tells us that once those lines blur, they're very hard to redraw. Kaptur doesn't demand an answer. She doesn't need one. Her point lands anyway. Words shape behavior. They shape policy. And they shape what the public comes to accept as normal. Then she pivots, and this is where the hearing really exposes a deeper problem. She talks about the defense industrial base, and not in the abstract think tank way. She talks about places, towns, factories, machine shops, composite material plants. The kinds of places that once anchored entire communities and were then hollowed out over decades of outsourcing, neglect, and political indifference. She reminds everyone, this didn't just weaken our economy, it fractured our society. And she's right. You cannot hollow out the industrial backbone of a country and then act surprised when resentment, division, and instability follow. You can't tell people for 40 years that their jobs are obsolete and then ask them to rally around national unity when the next crisis hits. And then comes the question that cuts through the fog. Are we actually committed to helping Ukraine win, or are we slowly backing away? For Kaptur, this isn't just about borders on a map. It's about whether democracies defend each other when it counts. Russia spans 11 time zones. Its ambitions don't stop at Ukraine's borders, and the outcome of this war will echo far beyond Eastern Europe. She calls it what it is, a test of liberty, a test of NATO, a test of whether democratic alliances mean anything when authoritarian pressure mounts. The response she gets is cautious, carefully worded, focused on peace and stopping the killing. And of course, everyone wants peace. No one sane wants endless war. But peace without justice, peace without deterrence, has a history of being temporary. And when the response shifts into political timelines, who was in office when, who wasn't, it starts to feel less like strategy and more like deflection. Because the question on the table wasn't about credit or blame. It was about preparedness, commitment, and urgency. What makes this exchange so important is that anyone shouted. It's that no one did. This was a conversation about the future hiding, inside a discussion about words, budgets, and drones. Marcy Kaptur was warning us, quietly, that the way we talk about power shapes how we use it, that the way we fund defense reveals what we actually value, and that abandoning industrial communities at home weakens our credibility abroad. You cannot posture strength on cable news, while your supply chains depend on foreign rivals. You cannot preach patriotism while entire regions are written off as economically expendable. And you cannot defend democracy overseas if people at home feel discarded by it. The obsession with warrior ethos sounds tough, but toughness isn't what wins the long game. Stability does, capacity does, trust does. A country that can build, innovate, and care for its people is far more secure than one that just talks louder than everyone else. Ukraine's drone innovations didn't come from abundance. They came from urgency, from survival, from a population that understood what was at stake. And that should scare us, not because drones are scary, but because it exposes how slow and complacent larger systems can become when they rely on legacy thinking. Captor's questions force us to confront something uncomfortable. Have we confused symbolism for strategy? Have we replaced long-term investment with short-term messaging? Have we let language do the work that policy should be doing? The defense industrial base is not just a Pentagon problem. It's a national one. It's about whether a young person in a deindustrialized town sees a future in skilled work or just another exit ramp out of their community. It's about whether democracy delivers materially, not just rhetorically. And on Ukraine, the stakes are even clearer. If democratic nations hedge, hesitate, or slowly disengage when authoritarian aggression persists, the lesson learned won't be subtle. It will be heard loud and clear by every would-be aggressor watching closely. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of credible deterrence, shared responsibility, and moral clarity. What Marcy Kaptur brought to this hearing was not nostalgia or ideology. It was memory. Institutional memory. Historical memory. The memory of what happens when words drift away from reality and when governments stop caring about the people who actually make the country run. That's not radical, that's foundational. And if we ignore voices like hers, calm, persistent, grounded in lived experience, we risk learning the same lessons again at a much higher cost. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe for more deep dive political commentary, and drop a comment below.